The diner smelled of coffee and syrup, the kind that clung to your skin and made you feel like home, even if you didn't have one. Leah Monroe moved between tables with practiced grace, her apron stained with splashes of milk and blueberry jam.
She didn't mind.
This place was her survival, her stage, her silence. "Order up," Sam called from the kitchen window. She grabbed the plates and turned, just in time to hear a crash at booth 9. "Daddy, I don't want the stupid pancakes." The voice was high-pitched, teary, and sharp. Leah's eyes found the source, a little girl, no more than 5, with golden curls and flushed cheeks. Across from her sat a man in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Leah's yearly rent. He looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not in their tiny corner of the city. Elijah Thorne. Leah didn't know his name yet, but she'd seen his face before, in magazines at checkout counters and whispers from customers. Billionaire. Widower. Elusive. Now he looked anything but composed. His jaw tightened, his hand curled into a fist on the table, and his voice was low. "Rosie, please. Just eat something." The girl crossed her arms and pouted. Her plate of chocolate chip pancakes sat untouched, syrup slowly dripping onto the table. "I want Mommy to feed me." The words made everything around them still. Leah's heart pinched. Without thinking, she slid the tray onto a nearby counter, walked to their table, and crouched beside the little girl. "Hey," Leah said softly. "I know those pancakes. I make them every morning, and trust me, they're special. They only taste good if you eat them with a smile." Rosie blinked at her, suspicious but curious. Leah smiled and cut a piece with the side of her fork. "Want to test it?" The little girl hesitated, then opened her mouth. From across the table, Elijah watched in stunned silence as this complete stranger gently fed his daughter, patient, warm, without judgment. And the little girl, she smiled, giggled. "See," Leah whispered. "Magic." Elijah cleared his throat. "Thank you. I didn't mean to cause a scene." "You didn't." She stood, meeting his gaze for the first time. His eyes were a deep gray, tired, unreadable. She just needed a little heart with her breakfast. He didn't respond, just looked at her for a moment too long. Then he nodded. Leah walked away before she could start wondering what it meant. An hour later, Elijah stood by the counter to pay. Rosie clung to Leah's apron, refusing to let go. "Do you live here now?" she asked innocently. Leah laughed. "I work here, sweetheart, but I'll be around." Rosie's lip trembled. Elijah placed a $100 bill on the counter and stepped in. "Thank you again. For everything." Leah glanced at the bill and pushed it back toward him. "You already said thank you." He looked surprised. "You're refusing a tip?" "I was just being human," she said. "You don't need to pay me for that." For the first time that morning, Elijah smiled, a small, surprised curve of his lips. As he walked out, Rosie waved wildly from his arms. "Bye, Miss Leah." Leah waved back, then turned away, clutching her tray tighter than she needed to. She didn't know it yet, but that moment, the spilled pancakes, the shy smile, the unexpected warmth, was the beginning of everything. And Elijah Thorne was not the type of man who forgot things that made him feel alive again. Elijah Thorne wasn't the kind of man who revisited the same place twice, especially not some rundown diner on 5th and Maple. But 3 days later, there he was, sitting stiffly in a booth by the window, alone this time. He didn't need coffee. He didn't need pancakes. He needed answers. "Can I get you something?" a familiar voice asked. He looked up. Leah stood before him in the same faded apron, her hair tied in a low messy bun, wisps falling around her face. Up close, she looked even younger than he remembered. Tired, but radiant. He cleared his throat. "Coffee. Black." She scribbled on her notepad without a smile. "Anything else?" "Your name." That caught her off guard. She looked at him carefully now, sizing him up like someone who knew how the world worked and didn't trust it. "Why do you want it?" "I don't forget people who make my daughter smile," he said simply. "You handled her better than anyone I've hired." Leah blinked, then slowly tucked the notepad into her apron.
"Leah."
"Leah Monroe." "Leah," he repeated, tasting the name like it meant more than it should. She brought him the coffee without another word. He didn't ask how much it cost. She didn't ask why he was still sitting there 20 minutes later, staring out the window like he was waiting for something.
He was.
Rosie. Across town, Rosie sat in her school classroom, her tiny hands coloring inside the lines of a butterfly worksheet. Her teacher praised her, but she barely smiled. When Elijah picked her up that afternoon, she only had one question. "Did you see Miss Leah?" His heart tugged. He nodded. "Will she come visit me?" He didn't know how to explain that people like Leah weren't the type to walk into his world. Not without an invitation. Or a reason. But maybe, just maybe, he could give her one. That night, Elijah stood in his silent penthouse apartment, watching Rosie sleep curled up with a stuffed rabbit. She used to cry for her mother. Now she whispered Leah's name in her sleep. He picked up his phone and made a call. Find everything you can on Leah Monroe. Early 20s. Works at a diner on Maple. Lives nearby. I want details discreetly. The next morning, Leah opened her mailbox and found a thick envelope. Inside, a formal offer letter, embossed in gold. Position, full-time nanny to Miss Rosalind Thorne. Salary, $180,000 annually. Housing provided. Non-disclosure agreement enclosed. Her hands shook. There was no sender's name. No card. But she didn't need one. Her landlord would be knocking on her door in 2 days. She had $63 in her bank account. A sick neighbor had given her extra shifts last week, and she still barely had enough for rent and food. But this was a trap wrapped in velvet. A billionaire's lifeline. She stared at the number again, heart racing. And then, slowly, she tore the letter in half. Some lines weren't meant to be crossed. No matter how much your heart wanted to see a little girl smile again. No matter how badly you wanted to feel needed. That night, it rained. Leah sat by her window, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. Her tiny apartment felt colder than usual. She clutched a small photograph in her hand, a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. No name written on the back. Just the date. She'd lost everything once. She couldn't afford to lose again. But life had other plans. Because just 2 nights later, Elijah Thorne would call her again, not with an offer, but with desperation. And that would change everything. Rain poured over the city like a broken promise, drenching sidewalks and making tires hiss along wet roads. Leah had just finished her night shift and was pulling her damp coat tighter around her when she saw the sleek black car parked outside the diner. At first, she thought it was a customer. But when the rear window slid down and she saw him inside, her steps faltered. "Elijah," she murmured under her breath. The driver stepped out and opened the door. Elijah didn't wait for her to enter. He got out himself, no umbrella, no overcoat. The rain clung to his expensive suit, but he didn't seem to care. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important," he said, voice low but urgent. Leah frowned. "If this is about the offer." "It's not." He ran a hand through his wet hair. "It's Rosie. She's refusing to eat. Again. She's not sleeping. Not talking to anyone. She keeps asking for you." Leah's chest ached. "I hired 2 of the best child therapists in the city," he continued, his voice cracking slightly. "They left in tears. My daughter told them they weren't, Miss Leah. She won't even let me hold her." Leah looked away. The raindrops sliding down her face made it easier to hide the emotion building in her eyes. "I need your help," he said. "Please." She'd never heard the word please sound like that. Like a man who had conquered the business world was finally facing something he couldn't fix. His daughter's pain. And perhaps his own. Leah exhaled. "You don't need a full-time nanny. You need someone she trusts. I'll come by just to talk to her. 1 visit. That's all." He nodded. "Thank you." She stepped into the car, unsure whether she was saving someone else or setting herself up to drown. The Thorne estate wasn't a house. It was a world. Marble floors, grand chandeliers, and the kind of silence that made your own heartbeat feel too loud. Leah followed Elijah up the curved staircase. In the nursery, the lights were dim. Rosie sat curled in the corner of her bed, hugging the same stuffed rabbit. Her eyes were red, and her face pale. The moment she saw Leah, she jumped off the bed and ran, throwing her tiny arms around her neck like a lifeline. "Miss Leah." Leah knelt, holding her tightly. "Hey, sweetheart. You came. You really came." Behind them, Elijah stood frozen. He had never seen his daughter cling to anyone like that, not even to her mother when she was alive. Leah sat on the bed, brushing Rosie's curls back, humming softly. She asked about her day, her dreams, her favorite songs. Within 15 minutes, Rosie was curled beside her, eating apples from a plate and laughing at a silly story Leah made up on the spot. Elijah leaned against the doorframe, stunned. "I told you," Rosie whispered, half asleep in Leah's arms. "You're magic." Leah swallowed past the lump in her throat. "Only because you believe in me." Hours later, Leah stood in the grand hallway, her coat back on, ready to leave. "I owe you," Elijah said quietly. "You don't," she replied. "You gave my daughter something no one else could." Leah looked at him, really looked at him. His exhaustion wasn't physical. It was soul-deep. "You're trying. That matters." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you consider staying a few nights a week? Just until she's okay again?" She opened her mouth to say no, but the memory of Rosie's smile stopped her. "2 nights a week," she said. "Only temporary." Elijah's expression didn't change much, but his voice softened. "Temporary. Understood." Neither of them knew then that some things, like love, like pain, like fate, have a way of staying long after they were meant to leave. Leah had never slept in a place with silk bedsheets, a walk-in wardrobe, or a call button for a private chef. Yet there she was, 2 nights a week, in the guest suite of the Thorne mansion, tucked into an oversized bed that felt more like a throne. At first, she thought she'd never sleep. But Rosie would crawl into her bed halfway through the night, warm and sleepy-eyed, whispering dreams and stories, and somehow, those nights felt more like home than her own cramped apartment ever did. The 3rd night Leah stayed, Elijah came home late. She was reading to Rosie in the nursery. Her soft voice floated down the hallway. Elijah stopped just short of the door, listening. "And the brave little bird flew all the way to the stars," she whispered, "because no one ever told her she couldn't." "Did the bird get lost?" Rosie asked sleepily. "No," Leah replied. She found herself. Elijah's chest tightened. He wasn't supposed to feel this. Not for the woman he'd only hired out of desperation. Not for someone who looked at his daughter like she was her entire world. Like Leah belonged there. Because she didn't. She couldn't. He was still grieving, wasn't he? And yet, he couldn't deny that when Leah was around, the mansion felt warmer, livelier, less haunted by memories, less lonely. Later that night, Leah was in the kitchen making tea when she saw Elijah standing by the window, tie loosened, glass in hand. She hesitated, then walked over. "Long day?" she asked gently. He didn't answer at first. Then, "I had to attend a fundraiser. First one without Celeste." Leah looked at him quietly. "My wife," he added, eyes still fixed on the city lights beyond the glass. "She passed almost 2 years ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry," Leah whispered. He nodded. Rosie was 4.
She didn't understand at the time.
"Sometimes I think she still doesn't. She just waits for her to come back." Leah's heart ached. That's why she clings to routine. To safe things. He glanced at her. "You're her safe thing." Leah blinked, caught off guard by the softness in his voice. "I don't know why she trusts me so much," she murmured. "I do," Elijah said. "You treat her like she matters. Not like she's porcelain." There was a long pause. Then, almost hesitantly, he asked, "What about you? Any family?" Leah smiled faintly, the kind of smile that looked borrowed. "Not anymore." He didn't push. Instead, he said, "Stay for dinner tomorrow. With me and Rosie." She raised a brow. "Is that part of the job?" "No," Elijah said. "It's an invitation." The next night, she stayed. They ate spaghetti on fine china, and Rosie got sauce all over her nose, which made her giggle until she snorted. Elijah laughed. Not politely. Not out of habit.
But laughed.
It was the first time Leah had ever seen him look younger than his age. And the first time she realized how much she enjoyed seeing that side of him. When dinner ended, Rosie fell asleep early, and Leah walked toward the guest room, but paused outside his office. The door was cracked open. Inside, Elijah sat at his desk, flipping through a leather journal. It wasn't work. It was a scrapbook. Photos of Celeste.
Rosie.
Laughter trapped in paper. And then she saw something strange, a photo of Leah and Rosie at the diner. She stepped inside. Where did you get that?
He looked up, surprised.
I asked someone to get it. I wanted to remember the moment. Leah stared at the image. Rosie was mid-laugh, flour on her cheeks. Leah was holding a spoon like a microphone, clearly singing something ridiculous. We were pretending to be rock stars, she whispered. Elijah smiled. She never looked that happy before. Leah hesitated. You shouldn't keep photos of me. It's not appropriate. I know, he said. But he didn't remove it. They stood in silence, the photo sitting between them like an unspoken confession. And for the first time, Leah wondered if this was still just a job or something much more dangerous. The mansion had many rooms, but lately, it was the smallest moments that filled them. Mornings began with Rosie's soft voice calling for Leah before the sun even touched the windows. Breakfasts were filled with giggles over mismatched pancakes and Leah's attempts at using the espresso machine, which, according to Rosie, sounded like a grumpy elephant.
And Elijah?
He had started coming home early. It wasn't planned. At least that's what he told himself. But when he walked in and saw the two of them dancing in socks across the marble floor, spinning like fools with music playing off Leah's phone, it became a habit he didn't want to break. Even if watching them sometimes made his heart ache. Because he knew this wasn't permanent. One afternoon, Leah was reading in the library when Elijah stepped inside, holding 2 cups of tea. Truce, he said, handing her one. She looked at him warily. We weren't at war. You've been avoiding me since the scrapbook. She lowered her eyes. It wasn't avoiding, just giving space. I don't need space, he said softly. I need honesty. Leah took a slow sip of tea to gather her thoughts. I care about Rosie.
Deeply.
But sometimes I forget my place here. He stepped closer, watching her. And what place do you think you hold? The temporary kind. He didn't respond right away. Then, what if I don't want it to be temporary? Leah looked up, startled. Elijah. I know it's sudden. I know I'm grieving, and you're trying to be professional. But I haven't felt anything real since Celeste. Not until now. She stood, her breath hitching. This isn't fair. Not to you, not to me. And not to Rosie, he asked. Leah nodded. She's already lost a mother. I can't be someone she clings to, only to disappear later. He stepped back, giving her space. I understand, he said, voice quieter now. I just needed to say it. That night, Leah sat by Rosie's bedside, brushing her hair as the little girl mumbled about stars and butterflies in her sleep. You're everything she's been missing, Elijah said from the doorway. Leah didn't look up. Then let's not break her heart. She kissed Rosie's forehead and stood to leave. I'll finish out this week, she whispered. And then it's best if I go. Elijah didn't stop her. But as she passed him, his fingers brushed against hers for the briefest second, like a breath not yet exhaled. 3 days later, Leah packed her things. She told Rosie she had to help someone else who needed her, and though the little girl cried, she hugged Leah tight and said she understood. But the moment Leah turned to leave, Rosie whispered through tears, Daddy's going to be lonely again. Leah didn't look back. Not because she didn't care, but because she cared too much. The mansion felt bigger without her. Too quiet. Too cold. Even Rosie stopped asking questions after the first week. She still waited by the window after school, still set aside Leah's favorite color crayon at the dinner table. But her laughter no longer echoed off the walls the way it used to. It came softer now, like she was trying not to wake up a memory. Elijah watched his daughter slip into herself again, and with every passing day, regret dug deeper into his chest. He thought letting Leah go would protect everyone's heart. Instead, it broke them. Leah tried to move on. She picked up extra shifts at the diner, worked late into the night, and buried herself in routine. But everywhere she turned, something reminded her of the Thorns. The little girl who ordered strawberry milk. The man who always sat in the corner booth, dressed in suits too expensive for a place that smelled like bacon grease. The crayon stuck in her apron pocket, Rosie's last drawing, folded and worn from too many moments of weakness. She missed them, both of them, and yet she stayed away. Because that's what you did when you knew you weren't supposed to fall in love with a broken man or a little girl who already had a mother written in memory. One rainy evening, weeks later, Leah found a note taped to the back entrance of the diner. It was crumpled, wet from the storm, and written in shaky, childish handwriting.
Leah.
I miss your pancakes. Daddy misses your eyes. Please come back, so he stops looking sad at the stairs. Love, Rosie. Leah sat down right there in the alley and cried.
Hard.
Because love wasn't supposed to feel like this, like a warm home you had to leave because you weren't sure you were worthy of staying. The next day, she was pouring coffee when a familiar voice cut through the usual diner clatter. Elijah? She asked, startled. He was standing at the counter, soaked from the rain, looking exhausted and desperate. I've tried to stay away, he said hoarsely. Try to tell myself you'd be better off without us.
But I was wrong, Leah.
I thought I was protecting Rosie. But you weren't a threat. You were her healing. He stepped closer. You were mine too. Leah stood frozen, heart in her throat. Elijah, I don't know if I can. He interrupted gently. I'm not asking for anything more than your truth. Do you miss us?
She didn't hesitate.
Yes, she breathed. Every second. That night, she returned to the mansion. Not as a guest. Not as a nanny. Not even as a temporary fix. But as someone who had become family, not through contracts or convenience, but through love stitched into the quiet moments no one else had bothered to claim. Rosie ran into her arms like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. And Elijah? He stood at the stairs with that same guarded expression until Leah stepped forward and whispered, You're allowed to be happy again. And in that moment, his walls cracked, not broken by grief, but softened by hope. The mansion slowly started to feel alive again. With Leah back, Rosie returned to her full of questions self, asking about stars, making flower crowns out of napkins, and dragging Leah into pillow fort missions that took up entire hallways. Elijah smiled more now. The tired man who once only knew how to survive his days was learning how to live them again. He watched Leah from afar sometimes, how she smiled at Rosie, how she moved through their home like she belonged there.
And it scared him.
Because he was starting to believe this might be permanent, that maybe he deserved happiness again. One quiet Sunday morning, they all sat on the patio, sharing breakfast under the soft sun. Rosie ran off to chase butterflies with a half-eaten pancake in her hand, and Elijah leaned toward Leah, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I meant what I said, he whispered. I don't want you to leave again. She looked at him, searching his face for hesitation, for guilt, for anything that would make her second-guess this. But there was only sincerity. I don't want to leave either, she replied, her voice soft. Their fingers brushed across the table, just enough to make her heart stutter, just enough to feel real. But happiness has a way of inviting storms. Later that week, while Leah was reading Rosie a bedtime story, the doorbell rang. It was rare for Elijah to get unannounced visitors. Rarer still for his voice to turn so cold when speaking to one. Leah heard hushed voices downstairs, tension thick in the air. Curious, she stepped into the hallway and froze. At the bottom of the stairs stood a woman in a white coat, hair tied back, eyes sharp and assessing. She was tall, elegant, and oddly familiar. Elijah, the woman said with a tight smile, you didn't tell me you replaced me so quickly. Leah's stomach dropped. He stiffened beside the woman. Dr. Camille. You weren't supposed to come back. And yet, here I am. Camille's gaze flicked up the stairs, locking on Leah. Is that the new nanny? Or your latest charity project? Elijah's jaw clenched.
She's family.
Treat her with respect. Camille raised a brow, amused. Family? After all this time, you still fall for the soft ones. Leah stepped down calmly. I don't know who you are, but you're upsetting the child upstairs. Maybe you should come back when you're less theatrical. Camille's smile vanished. I'm Rosie's aunt, and I have every right to be here. The silence that followed was deafening. Leah turned to Elijah. Is that true? He nodded once, reluctantly. Celeste's sister. We haven't spoken in years. Not since you shut me out, Camille added. But now I'm back, and I want custody of Rosie. Leah's breath caught. What? You're not her blood. I am, Camille said, stepping closer. And I'll do whatever it takes to make sure she's raised properly, even if it means dragging Elijah through court. That night, Leah sat on the edge of her bed, heart pounding. She had just begun to believe in this new life. Just started to open her heart. But now, someone from the past had returned, not just to haunt Elijah, but to take away everything Leah had started to call home. The house was silent, too silent for a home that had once echoed with laughter. Camille's threat lingered like a storm cloud. Elijah paced his study long after Rosie went to bed, legal documents scattered across the desk. Leah stood in the doorway, her arms folded tightly across her chest, not from anger, but to keep her nerves from unraveling. She's bluffing, Leah said finally, breaking the silence. She's not, Elijah replied without looking up. Camille has always been manipulative, but she's also brilliant. A well-known surgeon, clean reputation, and Celeste's only blood relative. Leah swallowed hard. You're her father. And Camille's lawyers will argue that I'm a grieving widower who hired a stranger as a nanny and emotionally spiraled until I latched onto you. His voice broke a little. They'll say Rosie deserves stability, and that I've failed to give her that. Leah moved closer. Then we fight. He looked up at her, startled. You do that? Go through this mess with me? She met his gaze, steady and sure. Rosie's not just your daughter anymore. The following days blurred into court filings, legal consultations, and whispered phone calls behind closed doors. Leah was interviewed, questioned, examined, every detail of her life dissected under a microscope. Camille, meanwhile, played the concerned aunt card in the media. She gave interviews. She smiled for cameras. She spun a story of love and responsibility. But behind the polished image, her threats to Elijah became sharper. If you let her go, Camille told him in private, I'll back off. Keep the child. Just end this farce with the nanny. She's not just the nanny, Elijah said through clenched teeth. She's the reason my daughter learned to smile again. Camille's eyes narrowed. Then watch what happens when I take that away. In the middle of the storm, Leah tried to protect Rosie from the chaos. They painted together, made storybooks from old socks. Leah taught her how to braid her own hair and pretend she wasn't scared. But one evening, Rosie asked the question Leah had been dreading. Are you leaving again? Leah froze, paintbrush in hand. No, she said, swallowing the fear in her throat. Not unless someone makes me. Rosie leaned against her shoulder. I don't want a new mommy. I want you. Tears stung behind Leah's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not in front of the child who trusted her so completely. At the custody hearing, Camille walked in with a team of lawyers. Elijah arrived with only one, and Leah, seated beside him, holding his hand under the table. Camille painted a vivid picture. A grieving father, a naive young woman, an unstable household. But when the judge asked Rosie who she felt safest with, the little girl looked directly at Leah. She loves me like my mom did. And she doesn't leave. Camille's face twisted, but the judge simply nodded. I've seen enough. After a painfully long pause, the verdict came. Joint guardianship. Camille would have visitation rights, but custody would remain with Elijah. And Leah? The judge didn't need to clarify her role. One look at Rosie clinging to her hand was enough. Later that night, the house lit up again. Rosie slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, a half-finished drawing of their family, Elijah, Leah, and Rosie, all under a rainbow, lying on her nightstand. Elijah found Leah on the balcony, her arms resting on the railing, the stars glowing soft above them. "She's yours too, you know," he said quietly. Leah smiled without turning. "She was always hers first, but I'm grateful she let me borrow her heart." Elijah stepped closer. "And what about mine?" This time, she looked at him. "Yours," she whispered, "came when I wasn't even asking." And when he kissed her, gentle and full of everything they had both held back, it wasn't about passion or desperation. It was about home. Spring came early that year. The gardens around the mansion bloomed as if reflecting the warmth blossoming within its walls. Rosie ran through the hallways like sunlight in motion, and laughter, once foreign here, became a daily melody. Leah and Elijah had found a rhythm. They cooked together, slow danced barefoot in the kitchen, and spent quiet evenings reading on the couch with Rosie between them. Love didn't sweep in like a storm. It crept gently, like dawn after a long winter. And yet, beneath it all, Leah was still afraid. Afraid this new world was too fragile. That one word, one legal paper, or one wrong decision could make it all disappear. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Elijah tucked Rosie into bed and returned with something in his hand, a small velvet box. Leah's heart skipped. But when he opened it, it wasn't a ring. It was a key. "To this house," he said softly. "To this life. You already hold our hearts. I want you to know you belong here." She blinked fast. "You're giving me the key? I want you to stay, Leah. Not as a guest. Not as help. But as part of this family. I'm not rushing you into anything more. I just want you to know you have a place here. With us." And with her heart pounding, she nodded. "I want that too." But life, as always, had its cruel sense of timing. Just as they dared to breathe, Camille returned. She came not with lawyers this time, but with a secret. One that turned Elijah pale when he heard it. "What are you talking about?" he asked, barely keeping his voice steady. Camille placed a document on the table. "I did a paternity test. Years ago. Without your knowledge." Elijah's hands trembled. "Rosie," Camille paused for effect, savoring the silence. "She isn't biologically yours." Leah felt the world tilt. She looked at Elijah, then at the papers, cold, clinical, undeniable. "But how?" he whispered. "Celeste and I—" "She had doubts," Camille interrupted. "She told me once, before the accident. I didn't believe it then. But I kept the test. Just in case." Elijah turned to Leah, devastation etched into every line of his face. "She's still my daughter. I raised her. I love her." "Of course you do," Leah said, her voice firm. "Nothing changes that." But Camille wasn't done. "I'm taking this to court. With no blood relation, you don't stand a chance. I want full custody. And this time I'll win." That night, Leah found Elijah on the patio, eyes fixed on the sky. "She's trying to destroy us," he said bitterly. "She's trying to control what she couldn't when Celeste was alive," Leah said gently. "But blood doesn't make you a father, Elijah. Love does." He looked at her, eyes heavy with pain. "You really believe that?" "I know it," Leah whispered. "And so does Rosie." He leaned into her, his voice raw. "Then help me fight. Not just for custody, but for our future." The chapter ends with Leah picking up the phone to call someone from her past, a lawyer who owed her a favor, someone she swore she'd never contact again. But love was worth bending old promises. And family? That was worth everything. The courtroom was cold, sterile, and unforgiving, far from the warmth of the home Elijah, Leah, and Rosie had built together. Camille sat across the aisle, polished to perfection, her legal team armed with DNA results and a perfectly prepared statement about Rosie's best interests. Elijah sat silently, dressed in black, holding Rosie's favorite stuffed fox in his lap like a shield. And beside him, Leah.
Calm.
Ready. Because this time, she wasn't just the woman who loved his daughter. She was the woman who would fight for her. When Camille's lawyer presented the paternity results, the courtroom held its breath. Camille spoke like a polished savior. "Rosie needs real stability. I may not be her mother, but I am family. Elijah isn't. The judge turned to Elijah. Mr. Hale, you've seen the results. You are not biologically related to the child. Why do you believe custody should remain with you? Elijah stood, his voice shaking. Because when Rosie had her first fever, I didn't sleep for 2 days. Because I learned to braid her hair even when my hands shook from stress. Because I know how many blueberries she likes in her pancakes. Because I loved her when no one else knew how to. His eyes locked with the judge's. Rosie is mine, not by blood, but by every late night, every scraped knee, every bedtime story. I am her father because I chose to be. Then it was Leah's turn. She rose slowly, clutching a small photo Rosie had drawn, one with 3 stick figures under a bright yellow sun. Mommy, Daddy, and her. Camille may be her blood, Leah said, but family is more than that. Family is who shows up. She let the silence settle, then continued. I grew up without one. I know how that feels. And Rosie, she doesn't just need someone with her DNA. She needs someone who tucks her in, listens to her fears, and makes her feel safe. That's Elijah. Her voice cracked. And I love her, as if she were mine. The judge sat back, eyes scanning the room. Tension gripped every corner. At last she spoke. Biology matters in law. But so does intention. So does presence. So does love. A pause. I hereby deny Camille Whitmore's petition for sole custody. Guardianship remains with Mr. Hale. Camille gasped. The judge continued, firm now. Ms. Whitmore, you may request supervised visitation. But this child's home, her emotional anchor, is with the people who chose her, not the ones who want to claim her out of pride or power. When they walked out, Rosie leapt into Elijah's arms, burying her face in his chest. Leah stood beside them, quiet, her chest trembling. She's really staying, Leah whispered. Elijah turned to her, the weight of months lifting from his shoulders. No, Leah, he said. We're really staying. A week later, under golden lights and spring blossoms in their garden, Elijah knelt again. But this time, there was no hesitation. No box with a key. Just a simple ring and eyes full of certainty. Marry me, he said. Not because of Rosie. Not because we survived the storm. But because you are the peace I never knew I needed. Tears spilled down Leah's cheeks as she nodded. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Years later, Rosie stood in front of her class on Parents' Day, beaming as she introduced her family. This is my daddy, she said proudly. And this is my mommy. She used to be our waitress, but now she's the queen of our house. The class laughed and Leah blushed. But Elijah, watching from the back, smiled. Because he knew, sometimes family is born from loss. But love makes it whole.